What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of Design to Convert. I start all these episodes off by saying exactly that. I do the same hand gesture. Maybe one of these days I will update it, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is our killer guest. Today we have Arsh Sidhu. He has been in the e-com game for a very long time, running some key growth initiatives for a variety of brands, most notably Asystems, and he actually even worked at Shopify and was one of the reasons why Shopify Plus exists. He's currently running a DTC consultancy, so if you need help growing your e-commerce brand, hit him up. Arsh, thank you so much for joining us on the show. How you doing, man?
Thanks for having me. Wow, you really brought the energy there. I love it. I'm fired up.
That's how we do it, man. Yeah, it's how we do. It's one of the things that I'll tell the guests on the show, or actually the audience on the show is we do like a quick like debrief on the episode, what we're going to talk about, and I have to like keep my energy kind of relatively mellow because when the camera's rolling, we got to get right into it. So, stay ready, man. So take us back to the beginning. We got to chat a little bit before the show, and you told me some really, really, really dope stuff about your journey, how you got into the game. Take us back to the start. How did you get into the e-com space? What were you doing, and why was that the path that you chose?
Yeah, sweet. So originally Canadian. So came out of business school, knew I always wanted to get into tech. The business school I was at, a lot of people were going to, work in finance or consulting. And I kind of just started networking and wanted to figure out how to get into tech. I was already pretty involved in extracurricular stuff that way. So I was networking, reaching out for people on LinkedIn, coffees, that kind of stuff. My friend passed along this listing. The listing was called The First Five, and it was for Shopify. And at that point, I was like, "Oh, Shopify is like kind of a bigger company. I wanted to work in like an early stage environment, learn how to build that kind of stuff." But he was like, check it out. It looks interesting. And Shopify at that time was hiring what was labeled as the first 5 sales folks for a division, which was like Shopify Plus. So looked at it, thought it was interesting, sent an email to Lauren Paddleford, who ended up becoming like the GM, and didn't think much of it, but wrote out a few questions, sent along this, and went along with the rest of my recruiting process. Lauren replied, and then I was like, "Oh crap, I actually have to apply to this." So then I submitted an application, went through the whole process. It was actually a full-time role, so I ended up started working in January part-time while I was finishing off my last year of my last semester of college. And essentially it was testing out if like some sort of mid-tier plan for Shopify would work. And we were just playing around with pricing. Essentially it was like 10 times higher in price than the highest tier Shopify plan. You had a dedicated account rep, and you had a couple other functionalities like increased API calls and access to design changes on your checkout. And we threw up a website, which started to kick inbound into gear. I specifically was doing a lot of outbound, and then we had some team members in Ottawa doing upgrades. Our team was based out in Waterloo, so brand new office. It used to be a yoga studio, and we had about, let's say, 7 people overall coming into that office initially. I would say like 9 months in, we started to figure out that this could work. We were closing deals at a really good velocity. We were figuring out where we could price the things. We actually got like a proper contract in place and that people would sign. And we also just figured out our value prop, very early stuff, right? It's like, who's your customer? How do you sell it? I was also just learning how to sell. I had no idea how to sell, which was a hiring criteria. So, looking at the job listing, it was great. It was like, do you have any skills?
How did you get around that? How did you get, if you didn't know how to sell, but the job was a sales job, you probably have some sort of intrinsic ability to sell, right? So like, What kind of Jedi mind trick did you use to get in there?
That's what they wanted. They wanted people without sales skills. Because the idea was,
wow, okay, nice.
it was like, we would learn how to do it like the Shopify way, and not like a very enterprise orientated sales approach, which was, legacy, and we thought wouldn't work. I was just happy that they were looking for a job where nobody had any skills. And, there's a lot of teaching that goes into it. We would sit down and just like learn on the job. We'd have like training sessions with Lauren. I just read a lot of books. And over time, you pick it up. But there's definitely a lot of training and development that went into the reps. And as the organization scaled for a long time, that was still their mentality. A lot of people there were really young on the sales team. And over time, we started to add in more experienced reps, but still the reps that were, kind of trained internally, either performed at par with people coming externally or exceeded that, which I think is just a testament to the training and the development that Shopify provided us. So that was that. I did that for like about 3.5 years. After that, like first year, things really started to scale super quickly. We had like 50 people joining like every Monday morning call as like new employees from across the board. Shopify Plus became a different business unit with their own product team, engineering, designers, launched offices in like London and Australia. Went through a bunch of different pricing changes. The org structure would change every 6 months. One of my bosses said it'd be like the best job I'd ever have. And me being right out of school, I was like, well, crap. It's downhill from here. It was an incredible time, incredible organization. Some of my best friends are still from there. And, that was kind of the start of being in this whole ecosystem in the world. And then after that, I wanted to go back into a bit more of an early stage environment. So, had my green card, wanted to move down to the US, was lucky enough to land at a company called FriendBuy, which was also scaling up their sales organization. So kind of getting back to that earlier phase of development, that Shopify was just a short 3.5 years ago. So helped in the early days of kind of that sales organization getting built out, but then had an itch to kind of jump to the brand side. So met Josh and Ollie, who were the founders of Asystems, through a friend who was at the fund that led the round for Asystems seed, called First Minute. And we just kind of hit it off. We would just like jam on things that they could be thinking about. I would just send them like stuff that I was reading. And about 3 months later, they were hiring and just asked if I might know anybody. And I just took that as an opportunity to put my hat in the ring and, put together some slides on how I would approach things. And we went for a couple more coffees, and they asked if I would join them, and I said, hell yeah. So I joined them, like I was mentioning, 3 months before launch. I already knew the developers that were building the site, which helped. So I just kind of came in, hit the ground running. And then we launched September 2019. And that was kind of like my first experience getting into brand side. Definitely very different than software, because you have to think about this thing called inventory, which is like a huge part of the puzzle that I'd never had to think about before. So that was massive learning. The only thing I was really good at was I understood Shopify inside and out. So like all the really tiny functionality points of it. But outside of that, had to figure out how to do digital marketing, how to think about ordering inventory, about quantities, figuring out how to manage cash flow around that, and forecasting, and then also just selecting a warehouse, how to operate and work with the warehouse providers. So there's a lot of learning, and the founders were thankfully very gracious with letting me learn. And out of a lot of experiments that we tried, a bunch of things went well, thankfully, and we were able to scale digitally, but also offline. Now Asystems sells in Erewhon, we're Nordstrom, Saks. So it was, in the day-to-day, it felt very long, but looking back at it, over 3 years, it was a great boot camp on how to launch and build and scale. And now I'm kind of taking those different pieces into the consultancy. And I guess I view it in a variety of different angles, right? I understand the technology side, on the Shopify and the ecosystem aspect of it. I understand kind of launching and scaling a brand from the marketing side, but then also on the ops side, how to think about cash flow, managing that with having units you can sell for different SKUs, and kind of bringing that all together and hopefully running an efficient company as to scale that.
It's an incredible story that stretches so many different parts of business, of the world, of the ecosystem. One of the things that I'll just call out, that's just more of like a personal thing, is that your story is very similar to mine. So like one of my first jobs out of college, I was the first salesperson at an e-com platform startup. We were trying to take on Shopify Plus, interestingly enough. It did not work. It was just like the small startup in Arkansas, and we were trying to build, like the thesis was
it agency or?
Oh, it was called Engine. No, it was we had like it was called Engine, and we were building on Solidus. So cool. I know like Glossier, they just moved over to Shopify. They were on Solidus before. They had a custom build on Solidus. So we were trying to turn Solidus into more of a specific platform. And the thesis there was like, in the Shopify ecosystem, you've got all the different apps. We were trying to consolidate and kind of integrate all the apps into one platform. Again, business didn't work, but I went from that to working. I had an agency for like a very brief period of time. And then I worked brand side, and I grew a company called Buff City Soap. And I actually remember, it's funny that you mentioned that you got to like write or be a part of the process of creating real like Plus contracts. I remember going line by line through our Shopify Plus contract towards the end of my time at Buff. Just how specific that thing was. But one of the things that I really love the parallel of is, when I first started at that e-com platform startup, our office was in a former O'Reilly's auto parts building, like a garage. It was functioning a garage, and concrete falls on the stuff. So so you were in a yoga studio, but then very quickly you're adding 50 people a day or 50 people a week, and it's now its own behemoth. What were some of the things that you had to learn, either through mentors, your bosses, or just like your own self-study and the experience of just being in the trenches of managing or like existing in such a rapidly changing environment, going from 6 people to 600?
Yeah. A lot. I think the biggest thing for me was always having a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I guess as openly as we scaled, the whole thing was like, hey, we'll bring in more experienced reps. And I don't know, maybe just me and being like, you know what, like I am an experienced rep. I've put in the hours, I've done all the readings, probably more than anybody. I was like, read on weekends, all my spare time, that kind of thing. So as we grew, it was, I think, important for me to always just kind of, not like I was trying to like be in battle mode, but just for my personal development, just to be like, you know what, like I think I'm just as good as other people, even though I was kind of like fresh out of school and, still doing my first job. So that was important for me, just my own personal development. I think secondly, what's important for me is just also seeing how quickly I can help other people, especially as a team. A lot of the way that the organization was built was very team orientated. I think maybe going back to, not being a typical sales organization, where everyone's like a different rep and they're all competing against each other. Shopify sales org was very collaborative, and we were only as good as, the rest of people that could scale up quickly. So, I kind of took it upon myself to like either go out and recruit a lot of my friends that I thought were really talented, I could learn quickly or try to get involved as much as I can with helping others. That's kind of where the Dojo name for the consultancy comes from. Internally at Shopify, I was helping a few sales reps, and that kind of setup was called the Dojo. So we would like meet, I forget what it was now, maybe like once a week, and just go through like calls, like recorded calls, demos, things that I was like trying to work on, things that they were trying to work on. So trying to just be like super collaborative that way. And then, outside of that, just making people feel welcome in the organization whenever people would join, and try to just have them, we would do like these, like lunches where everyone kind of like talks about themselves and all that, but I try to go out and like say hi to people and get to know them. Especially because we're in a much smaller office in like a different city. So they're just things that, I tried to do, not necessarily like learnings. But I think at that point in my career, it was important to pick those things up. And I'm happy I did that. Maybe that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So walk me through. I want to talk a lot about the experience you had at Asystems, like being in the brand side, but obviously there's the intermediary of your time at FriendBuy. Going back to like Shopify Plus, you're there. You're the first part of this first 5 salespeople testing out this entire like enterprise idea. Shopify is like, oh yeah, maybe there's something here. Within a few months, you all realize that, oh my gosh, there's actually something significant here, like 10 times more than the highest tier plan. And we just get to like, it's a layer of service that you add initially. Walk us through what Shopify Plus was technically, like what you were paying to get back then relative to what it's evolved to now. Like because like I think it's an interesting question that a lot of brands have is like, when do I upgrade to Shopify Plus? Like when does it make sense?
And the need for Shopify Plus came because brands were scaling and thinking of something else. But as an organization, Shopify knew that it could handle the volume, but maybe not potentially unique functionality that maybe mid-market or enterprise clients might need. So there's 2 sides of it. One was brand scaling on Shopify, and we could do that all day. Like we could handle the volume. The big case study back then was like Kylie Jenner, and we could handle the flash sales. I think Chubby's was one of the biggest accounts back then. And also just like random like merch stores. I forget some of their names now. And then outside of Shopify world back then, and you're probably familiar with it too, a lot of it was not on a hosted platform. For whatever reason, cloud software came a little bit later to e-commerce. Most people were still doing it where they were hosting their old servers. They had a development agency. It took forever for them to like build out any functionality. So it was an interesting paradox where brands are starting and scaling on Shopify and seeing a lot of success versus being off of Shopify and maybe doing something like Magento, where, they were on it, but they had like a development team they were paying thousands of dollars to a month. Their site would crash. They would lose money. They were like Pixel wouldn't work. So where we actually ended up winning was external to the market, like external to Shopify. And the value add there initially was come on a hosted platform that you can scale with, and sometimes even pay less than what you were paying for like a development agency to help you like just stand up your site and maintain it. The value add for scaling brands on Shopify was slightly less, if I'm being honest. But it was massive for brands coming on to Shopify because it was just a very different way of setting up their infrastructure. Over time, after we proved out that model, the functionality started to get layered on. So then we're like, oh, cool. Like people actually want to be on Shopify Plus and they're willing to pay, back then $1,000 a month. Let's try to actually build out functionality. So, it becomes a real like mid-tier type solution. We were calling it enterprise, but it was really a mid-tier solution. And so then the focus became on what do these brands want? They want more customization. They want internationalization. They want wholesale capabilities. And sometimes they just need a little bit more dedicated support in addition to what we're providing. So there's like tiers of support that way as well. It changes, it continues to change, but I think the framework was, let's launch functionality onto Shopify Plus, which is kind of the more complex features. And now, as we're seeing over time, that functionality rolls down to the other tier plans. And in a way, Shopify is like commoditizing that functionality. So, you launch, let's say, checkout.liquid. Now everyone has access to checkout, apps and functionality. Shopify's Flow initially came to Shopify Plus. Now it kind of is for every plan. There's a lot of internationalization features that initially came to Shopify Plus. Now it has across different plans. But there's also, I think, an evolution of how Shopify Plus and Shopify work together. Internally, there were like kind of two business units or two business like organizations, and now they work more synergistically. Where initially it was its own separate like development team, but now it's more so the thinking is let's build more advanced functionality where maybe over time it scales out to everybody, and at a really good cost. Right, I think it's still probably more cost effective than most other like mid-market enterprise solutions. Probably the most prominent one being Salesforce Commerce Cloud. That does like now some like it always had like a cloud capability. They just kind of went to super high market. Shopify started mid-tier and there was nothing, or Shopify started SMB and there's nothing really in the middle. Salesforce Commerce Cloud never really came down. They tried to. Shopify had success going up. BigCommerce did a really successful pivot and kind of took over that mid-market. And it's funny how quickly people forget that they were really an SMB product. So their CEO's done a really good job like shifting that and having them survive. Volusion used to be around. I don't know if they're still around. They might still be. If you remember them.
That's not a name I've heard in a while.
Yeah.
Volusion.
So yeah, Volusion was kind of like so it's still around. It's still around, but definitely not as prominent. And there was a bunch of different players. There's so many players trying to do it, but I think the challenge was, to your point earlier, it's very difficult. It seems easy, but it's very difficult to build e-commerce platform functionality because every brand's so different. It has nuanced, unique use cases. So that's why I think the app ecosystem play worked in Shopify's favor versus trying to like build every unique piece of functionality that a merchant wants. And we have the saying that like, and you've probably heard it where, Shopify builds what most brands want most of the time, and then everything else is for the App Store. So it provides the capability for extending the platform, but it won't necessarily do it itself. And it's a good sales channel too, right? The whole agency and technology partnerships becomes a massive sales channel that is other people endorsing the platform versus the platform endorsing itself. So that's a little bit about that.
I think, that's I love the full context that you provided, because I think for people that are just in Shopify and it's all they ever know, that's all they've ever known. Like there's so much nuance on how some of these things were charted, how like why decisions were made, how stuff was built, etc. That when you zoom out and you look at what else was available, who else is doing what, a lot of it starts to make sense. Like I remember back when I was working at the last e-com platform startup, Demandware. So Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Salesforce had just bought Demandware and turned it into Salesforce Commerce Cloud.
Yeah.
And so that was like the big transition that was like, and I remember hearing like, okay, it's like a minimum $1 million a year to work with that solution. And that's, when you look at like Shopify Plus now, where it's, $2,000 a month. So it's like $24,000 a year just for the platform fees. You're like, holy cow, it's so much. But then there are like people out there, there are brands out there that are paying at minimum $1 million a year to have, you know, their website running. It's a completely different sense of scale, and obviously there's a ton more complexity, and there's a lot more nuance to it. But I do appreciate the nuance and kind of like the environmental setup that you provided there. It helps contextualize like where Shopify Plus kind of fits. So you're at Shopify Plus. You're like, Canada's cold. It's time for me to get to LA, which is where you're at now.
Pretty much.
And then so yeah, I mean, like I've been to Canada. It's beautiful, but I'm not much for the. I don't really hang out the cold. Yeah. So you go to FriendBuy, which is for those of you who are not aware, it's loyalty and rewards. Which is it exclusively a Shopify app, or do they exist outside of Shopify?
Yeah, they exist a lot outside of Shopify as well. But at that point, you know, Shopify is becoming prominent. They just kind of found me online, I guess, like through a recruiter, and they were looking to build out kind of the sales function. They had a few sales folks already there, but it was kind of just coming together. And they, at that time, was really focused on referral marketing. They had a loyalty solution now as well. And they're a little bit more like enterprise. They still had like the Smiles of the world as like a loyalty and referral solution. And they sat a little bit above that. Yapo had some solutions as well through an acquisition. I forget who they acquired. It was Swell.io. So that existed, and then like Yapo bought them. But they sat a little bit above that with like more advanced functionality and features. So they'd have clients like Disney and Walmart and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of similar type of stuff. It's funny going from one organization to the other and seeing like it's kind of the same problems people are trying to go after and solve. So it's interesting seeing the parallels. The difference was it was a real startup. We'd always say at Shopify Plus we're like a startup, and like our VC is Shopify. But when you're at a real startup, you realize like the challenges that come with a real startup, right? Like it's largely like a talent problem, and also like a capital problem, and just like a brand name problem. If you're Shopify, you can go out and like put up a job post and get like thousands of people applying. Well, your FriendBuy, you're like reaching out with an email and probably having more of a harder sell than like reaching out with Shopify email and being like, hey, you know, people already know what you do. But, you know, FriendBuy had a really good product. They were scaling well, really good logos. They still are like fairly prominent in the niche that they play in. And you know, scaling really well on that side as well. So it was fun. It was like a true like startup experience, I think, for me, especially like kind of going back to earlier where I was like, okay, I wanted to come out and like start at a startup company out of school. That was like my first kind of actual real experience in the startup. And then I was crazy enough to go even earlier and go like right from scratch, outside of like probably the ideation phase that the founders had been working on for like a year. And I guess now I'm kind of doing even earlier. I'm just kind of like doing it, you know, my own way from scratch, which is kind of where I wanted to be. So kind of happy with that. So that was kind of like the steps there.
Walk us through the transition from going from like being in the SaaS world to the product. One of the things you mentioned earlier was all of a sudden you've got to deal with inventory, and with inventory is cash flow, and there's this layer of profitability that you don't have to worry about when your cost of replication on software is practically zero, you know, like, so like walk us through all of the transitions that you had to go through and the learnings that you had to go through to be able to run growth at Asystems.
It was a massive amount. We were really lucky with advisors. So, you know, shout out to Kevin Dasu, who's our advisor. He's now the president at Manscaped. He helped us with a lot of thinking around very early building out models and, you know, inventory tracking. And we still made a lot of mistakes. I don't know how we would do it without it. But I think in hindsight, we were really good. It was always a pain, but we were always really good with our financial modeling. So we understood, at least at a high level, the interplay between cash and inventory and revenue and like marketing spend. Took forever to update. So we would like go and update it like every month, and we'd be like, oh, I've got to fill in the actuals and how are we far from forecasts, and okay, like we were off here or we were right here. So it was definitely tedious, but it helped give visibility, at least like maybe like 80% visibility of where the future was, which probably helped all our nerves. But we still made a lot of mistakes. And I think one big moment for me was reading this article about Amazon's like cash conversion cycle and learning what a cash conversion cycle was. And then like, you know, being like, oh guys, like this is what it is. Like this is how we, you know, pay for stuff. And then like people buy it and then we pay for it after. Easy as a concept, harder to execute on. Because then you go to manufacturers and manufacturers don't want to give you stuff up front without like, you know, getting paid.
They're like, yeah, oh, you want to like take like 6 months to pay us? No, how about you pay us? You know, like,
yes, more.
Like, there's yeah, exactly. Like, how about you pay 110% of whatever the invoice is just for asking that question? There was a great article and breakdown of Gymshark's cash conversion cycle. And I think this is like it popped off a couple years ago. Jay, I'm trying to remember his last name. Yeah, we'll post it on the show notes. I'll find the link and post it on the show notes. I think it's just because I can't remember how to pronounce Jay's last name and I don't want to butcher it on air.
I remember reading that. Yeah, no, definitely a moment for me too.
And it was just like, oh, like, and I remember thinking like, maybe I should go do that. And I did the same thing. I called up a couple of suppliers and they're like, bro, you are not big enough to ask for this. Like, get out of here. Like, just pay the invoice and we'll call it a day. So it's fun. But it's good. Like, I mean, if you can figure it out. And now you have tools like the Parker and then what's the other one that everyone talks about? There's a couple of financial tools now that help you create like a virtual extension.
Yeah, the ones that we used. Shout out to Parker guys too. Like Martin Cold emailed us like years ago. He was like the first employee there at Parker, and I read that email and I was like, this is exactly what we need. And like now they're doing a really good job. Of course, it's like a really useful tool for a lot of scaling brands. So we used Parker. We switched over to Ampla, and you know they were a provider of basically our bank. We still had a different bank, but they're essentially like a bank now for B2C brands, providing really good line of credit support with that. So we used them for a line of credit. And then I was just managing that too, right? Managing our line of credit and then Parker and then just cash and figuring out where to spend what. And we did a whole lot of stuff too. We used Clear. We looked at Wayflyer. We had Settle. We finessed having Settle and Ampla at the same time because we were like, oh no, like I don't know how that happened, but they don't typically want to have both providers. And we kind of just like ignored emails and kept running with it. So you know, just got to figure out how to make it work. So you know, we set that all up in the beginning. It was just like we had a bunch of money in the bank. We were just saying like putting in orders, sitting on a lot of inventory for months, and we just got tighter about it. Found like different manufacturing partners that could do smaller runs and actually quicker, which actually helped figuring out how to like set up the workflow so we ordered more packaging and then could run production faster instead of just like getting production packaging at the same time as we were running production. So that sped things up. And then on the marketing side, you know, just getting tighter with the channels, and whatever channel started to work definitely helped. Have a little bit more consistency and how we scale things. So it was all just,
what were the, sorry, go ahead.
No, it was all just like stuff on Twitter or stuff like that I randomly came across.
Walk us through what the product is that or the products. I think because I was looking at the site just before we jumped on, and I thought there was like a really interesting. It's a really interesting approach to the vertical, but I'll let you describe what the products are and why they were cool, and then walk us through the channels that you were using to grow.
I could give you the background because it was actually a very different brand when it launched.
Okay.
The vision for a system initially was that men still take care of themselves, but it's just there's not really a men's oriented wellness brand that's like aspirational. So a system was launched as a men's health and wellness brand with this concept that there would be products for your inside and outside, and that would make up a system. So the initial system was called Total Body. There were supplements, like men's essential supplements. So you had an omega-3 a multivitamin with some adaptogens in it, and as well as a testosterone booster with like stuff like ashwagandha and DHEA, that kind of stuff. And then there's a skincare kit, a cleanser, a day cream, and night cream, and that made up Total Body. And that was the first system. The second system was around recovery. So there's an inside pill, which was a CBD anti-inflammatory pill that you would take with turmeric in it. And then outside was this gel roll-on, which we still have today, actually. So it was like I call it a bougie version of like Icy Hot. With like a metal top and smelled really good and had CBD in it. Very popular. For a variety of different reasons, we shifted to becoming a unisex brand. And some of it was like just internal, some of it was kind of external. COVID had hit as well. So we had an office where we were initially hosting events. We had to kind of shut that down. And then, start to think about how we can go more commercial. And instead of targeting just men, we're like, what? Women are usually the consumer and the buyer, if not for themselves, for their partner. The products that we're creating, that were coming down the pipeline, weren't necessarily only for men. For example, like, the skincare and as well as like the recovery products. And it was just more commercial. So any of the products that we were coming out with after that was stuff that, were in larger markets. So after that, we launched, sleep gummies, daytime stress gummies, launched a collab with Mod around libido gummies for men and female. And then after that, came out with a productivity product. So all very like big commercial spots or markets that we were going after. And then shifted the brand. The easier part of that is getting different models in photography. The harder part of that is figuring out what that brand ethos is. So over time, what's become and where the focus is for System today is we build products that have clinical grade ingredients and then test those internally as well. So we do our own clinical tests on it. If any of the products that you'll see have some sort of patented clinical ingredient, it's purely a supplements brand. We've got away from skincare. And, it's a unisex brand, but still very elevated, very aspirational, but a lot more commercial than it initially was. That took some time. That took some time, probably at least a year of like testing out different positioning. We had this terminology called betterment, which initially was cool to kind of like try to invent a word that people could rally around, but people didn't really understand it. So we got away from Betterment, other than like now it's just on our blog. It's called the Betterment Journal, I believe, the Betterment Project. We tried this positioning of like build your system, and you have a bunch of different products around that, which is still a part of kind of the idea of the product range, but people didn't really understand that either. So it was interesting trying to do that kind of sort of live. And just seeing kind of what resonates and sticks, and then kind of figuring that all out in between. But yeah, today the focus is supplements brand that has clinical grade ingredients. We do our own clinical tests, so we know their work, and it's for building a wellness system across from when you wake up to when you go to sleep.
Have you seen Brian Johnson, the guy that's trying to reverse aging?
Yeah.
That's not to say that these two brands are correlated or related in any way. It just makes me like when I think to your point about the aspirational thing, I'm like, I look at what Brian Johnson does, and I'm like, man, that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
And then I look at what the system does and what the sell, and I'm like, I was like, well, I was looking at the products and I was like, if I wanted to be somewhat like Brian Johnson, I probably wouldn't do I wouldn't go full on blueprint, but I would at least like try like some of the gummies that you have or the roll on stuff. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think you knocked the aspirational aspect out of the park, and I guess the functional ingredients as well. I think I think that comes across really well.
Yeah, it's hard
And
building
again,
a
it's
brand.
just the Brian Johnson thing was like so tough. It is hard building a brand. It's very easy to arbitrage, but it's hard to build a brand. Walk us through. So like, tell me what that was like. Like, I mean, I'm sure Shopify, you've got an existing brand. Friend Buy, not so much. You kind of have to build it, and you kind of like have to go even further because now you have I think Friend Buy, you kind of get around not having a brand per se because it's a B2B kind of a tactical tool. But
Yeah.
a system it's brand. It's reliant on brand in a way. Like, how did you figure that out?
I'm not good at it. It's like credit to the founders. But they're very detail oriented, which is like a massive learning. And the whole idea is they come from fashion backgrounds. So, why do you buy, for example, Anti-Social Club? Like what does it represent to you? It's usually like you want to be a part of that ethos. So they realize, people buy shirts for like $150 because people buy into some sort of lifestyle. I think one of the other things, personally, I don't know if it was intended, was a takeaway from fashion world is usually big fashion brands have that like one iconic thing that they might be known for. So, for example, Hermes has that like orange color that everyone kind of knows about.
Yeah.
Our angle for us was the packaging. So I have the product here. So this was like kind of our approach to like really unique packaging solution. This took forever to actually nail down. Like, this stuff is all eco-friendly. This is not plastic. You can recycle it. You can refill. You can take this out and refill it.
Even the hinge, like the position of the hinge, I think is unique on the box itself. Like that's such a like it's not. I don't know why, but it's just not like a standard hinge. But it makes it feel that much more special just when you look at it.
Yeah. So it's all of the details that go into this kind of stuff. It takes a while to get right. My eye isn't like super good at it right now because I'd be the guy that would like spin up a landing page and it'd be like, on Replo or Shogun, and I just like punch in some random copy and throw in an image, and I'd be like, all right, let's run a Facebook ad, and they'd be like, no, we can't put that into the world. So I think it's being very strict on, your brand guidelines, how you show up in the world. There's a side of it where like people forget, we did go through that brand kind of evolution. But I think as much as you can try to stick to it, that really brings together that brand. Because if you kind of step outside of that and just like, for example, throw up those landing pages that don't exactly look super slick and clean, it moves away from it. So the founders were always really strict about like what we put into the world. Then outside of that was storytelling. I was storytelling on other people's, paths. We did a series called My System, and it wasn't necessarily about people that were like prominent. It was just people that had like really interesting stories. I think what we could have been better at was doing more shorter form content series. Like our videos were long and took a lot of production time to put it into the world. But I think content's like a really key way to build stuff that's more than just like putting products out there. So I can send along some of them. Some that are really cool. But it just highlights like, different people's stories. And then we can shape in like, oh, what's your system? Like, what do you take in the morning? What are like health and wellness activities that you do? And then we would throw events whenever we could to try to like bring that to life and bring everybody in. A lot of marketing is like that for us too. I think maybe you're similar where, most of the time, if you're sending like emails and communication to customers, you want to either be educational or probably entertaining. And then every now and then hit them with like, here's some product and buy, but we always try to be more like a bit of a content studio and put out like educational stuff and hopefully have people like email open their emails and get some insight from it, more like a newsletter. And then whenever we do product launches or sales, which are still pretty often, I think people just are more likely to open an email because they think there might be something good in it, or they're already like bought into a lot of the value that you provide, so they're willing to buy a shirt or buy the product. We had a big apparel side too, not big, but it was an important part of the business. So with probably most launches that we did, we had like some sort of apparel release with it, which helped kind of drive the brand forward as well. So that helped build something a little bit more than just selling products.
And that's rare. It's very like to have such a specialized product. Like you see too many supplement companies, for example, that have a meaningful apparel business. Like some of the bigger ones, sure, like maybe like, yeah, I'd rep like a First Form or like maybe like a Ghost t-shirt, but like the apparel that is on the Asystems site right now, like this, like the sweatpants and the hoodie, like I'm just as you mentioned earlier, I'm wearing an antisocial.
Yeah.
Okay.
We wouldn't try to make it like here's a system and here's a logo of the system. It'd be like sort of branded, but like we had like one of our launches was called Complete Calm because it was like de-stress gummies and sleep gummies. So we made some merch around like the whole Complete Calm, and like the iconography was different and the fonts were different. People should just want to wear it, right? It's just like it should look good. And then if they're wearing it every day, they probably know where they got it from and resonate a little bit more with what you're building. So I wouldn't classify. I think there's a difference between like merch versus like properly doing it. So we tried to properly do it as much as we could. Limited runs, but we try to partner with people too. The first drop that we did with Nate Brown, and he's like a creative director, has his own like creative directing like studio. Used to do some work with Kanye. So we definitely took that side of the launch pretty seriously as well.
That's amazing. So we're coming up on time a little bit, but before we go, I've got a couple more questions, and I want to ask you about your consultancy now. Which did you say it was called Dojo? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's called Dojo.
That's sick. That's an awesome name. So with Dojo, tell us about some of the lessons. So like maybe one key lesson that you pulled from all of your previous experiences. We'll start there, and then I've got another one from referencing something that we talked about previously. So like tell us like the biggest lesson that you learned from your time at Asystems and FriendBuy and Shopify that now feeds the core of your work at Dojo.
They're all sort of different, but they sort of interplay. I think a common theme is a lot of companies are sort of running blind in some sort of direction, but like, they probably like don't see too far ahead of themselves. Maybe they have like a little lamplight on, and so they can see a little bit in front of them. So I think a lot of my work initially starts with like strategic planning, and like resource allocation and, kind of figuring out what a longer term plan is and then building back. That's sort of how we would do it at Asystems too. And as much as we can, if we can work with the partners and stakeholders on different functions across like inventory buying and demand forecasting and marketing, we'll try to bring that all together before we start to think about what levers we can pull on growth. And I think it's easier to do the planning, but harder to do the resource allocation. Our challenge with the system, for example, was like we didn't know what we were doing with ads. And there's a lot of work that goes into it, from like landing page development to content to like hooks and storyboarding. And at Asystems, we figured out how to get those pieces together over time. Thankfully, we had the time to do that. But now it's like the first kind of things that I'm doing when I initially come in is figuring out capital and resource planning, figuring out goals based on that on a longer term horizon, doing some modeling, which, is annoying and tedious. I don't particularly enjoy it, but it's useful and helpful. And then figuring out the right partners, either capabilities we might have or friends of mine that would be able to provide it. And then start to kind of get more tactical in terms of like, do we do paid ads? Do we do SEO? Do we do more organic content? We did that with TT as well. Like we've done so many different things at the system that didn't work. So that's sort of how I approach it. Maybe a little bit more holistically, but this is also probably why I try to work more at a founder level or a CEO level. Because I think we think a little bit more holistically that way. Sometimes with the VP of marketing, it's very granular. Not saying we don't do a really good job, but there's other aspects that I know go into some decisions. For example, you can't just like turn your ads on to like 10x the next day because you just won't have inventory, and inventory is going to take 3 months to come, and you need to like manage that. So that's sort of been my approach. Thankfully, a lot of it's come organically, but always looking to just like jump on calls and be helpful. And if there's a way to work together with brands, then we kind of go from there.
I think there's a lot of beauty in the consultancy model. Like a lot of folks obviously do the agency, and there's like a value in doing all of the execution. But having the visual that you provided, which is like most people at best have that little like headlamp seeing in front of them as they navigate the darkness that is trying to grow an e-commerce business. And then you are able to go in and you're the floodlights, right? So being able to say, hey, you're the floodlights, and you have a map of the terrain because you've already traversed it yourself. And having that context and being able to like impart that context onto these folks, I think it's an incredible value that I don't think you see enough of in our space, in the DTC space in particular. So it's really great that you're doing that. One of the things that you mentioned before we started recording was a particular client in the agricultural tech space. Are you able to speak a little bit to detail on what you're working on there? Because it was honestly like really, really freaking cool.
Yeah, the company is called Monarch Tractor. So I was talking to Sanjay earlier that, it's not just brands, it's also just direct to consumer companies, which all have like fairly similar challenges. So Monarch Tractor today, their website is a legacy build, and their focus was to shift to being more of a technology company. So that's what we're working on right now. Their site should actually launch in about a month. And how that went around was I actually just got introduced to the founders. They're working with an agency that wasn't working out. Kind of probably classic horror story that, you get quoted something and then realize, it's significantly more. So they were pulling the plug on that midway through the project. And I was brought in to kind of help and advise, and then bring in sort of people that I've worked with that do a really good job with design and development. And so we've been working on that now for the last 3 months. Just figuring out everything from, what does each page need to represent? What's the user journey? What do we not want to include because it is a new concept? And just to rewind, Monarch Tractor is an autonomous electric tractor company, very much the first in their space, but solving a really big problem around profitability for farmers, since most farming operations run at a loss in the US. And a lot of that is around like the tractor and the diesel and the cost related to that. So they're reshaping that. They've been around for 5 years, working on technology through different iterations of the product. This is like the 5th tractor that is going into actual production. And they're getting a really good response. They're getting good coverage from publications. They're getting dealers signed up really quickly. So I'm really excited for that launch of the site. And I think the parallel is probably similar to like a Rivian or a Tesla type site, where we'll take reservations. But the tractor is also going to be $75,000. So not one of those, purchases that you make instantly. So pretty excited about that one. But again, I think everyone's trying to solve similar type of challenges. How's a user land on the website? Who are the different users, from an investor to a farmer to a fleet owner to someone that might just be looking for a job? So that's stuff that we think about. And then classic like header, subheader, what are you positioning? How big is the button? What color is the button? And then how do you go through like the checkout journey? This one's interesting because you could have multiple different delivery addresses. I'm just going to buy a tractor and it shows up. Maybe you have multiple different farms. Maybe you're buying multiple different tractors, even variations of tractors. So interesting nuances to work around with that. But it keeps things exciting. And they do a really good job. They're super structured, really good resources that I can tap into. So it's nice kind of working with a bigger company versus some of the smaller things that I've done now most recently. So it's interesting parallels across those and the different clients that we have.
But one of the beautiful thing that you just described is you can take every piece of experience that you have driving growth and go to this company that sells tractors. And, electric, self-driving, all that stuff. Like on the website, it says that they're driver optional, which is pretty slick. But like you are able to provide an immense amount of value to this organization using the principles that you've honed over the last decade, in a completely different non-agricultural, non-tractor industry, and I think that's something that's so special. And again, I don't think we as a I guess like I'm going to kind of generalize for the direct to consumer community, we talk much about how transferable our skills are across different industries, or how if we were to go into and I'm sure you're experiencing this right now firsthand, but if we were to go into industries that are not necessarily e-com at all and apply the principles and the things that we take for granted in e-com, all of a sudden, boom, you're transforming businesses that, they're like, holy cow, you could do this. I'm sure you've heard that.
Especially the legacy industries.
Yeah, that's so cool. So we're up on time, but I have two questions for you. One is business and one is personal. So the business question is, what can we expect from you? What can we expect from Dojo? What can we, just macro, like what's coming down the pipeline that's like that you're really excited about?
Yeah, a lot of client work. So Monarch, I shared about. There's a scaling, skater brand that I'm working with as well. So I think over the next few months, just excited to like kind of bring that kind of stuff to light. I've been doing this now for like about 3 months, and a lot of it's just been like behind closed doors, just kind of working on it. I haven't really put up stuff like case studies and that kind of stuff. But I think as we start to make a little more announcements around some of the brands that we're working with, pretty excited about them scaling and the projects that we're putting out.
That's awesome. Okay, and then tell us. All right, so here's the personal question: if you were to go back to the start of your career and everything that you know now, what would you tell your younger self based on everything that you know now? What piece of advice would you give yourself?
It's a lot of different things. I think currently it is how I define winning. And super happy with the kind of the path I took and how I got here. But I think my definition of winning has changed to be more holistic around my entire life instead of just work. And I think now I think about, am I not only winning at work, but am I winning in my personal life and my health and wellness? And am I doing that well instead of just like my career aspect of my life? So I tell my younger self to, think as much about the career as you think about your friends and family and your health and wellness. And that's really like, I think a true definition of winning. It's kind of how I think about it now.
That's amazing. and a great reminder for us all. I know that's something that's high value to me. Arsh, thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been so much fun. Learned so many different things, and I want to do this again soon, because I think we scratched the surface on a lot of different stuff, and
this is great.
I'm excited to dig in deeper. But thank you so much for joining me on Design to Convert, man.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.